The wind was a living beast, howling through the desolate Montana plains, tearing at the lone cabin nestled precariously at the edge of the sprawling, silent wilderness. Snow, fine as dust yet heavy as stone, whipped in blinding sheets, erasing the world beyond a few feet from the frosted window panes. Inside, Clara, a woman hardened by years of solitary frontier life, stoked the embers in her stone hearth, the only source of warmth against the relentless December storm. Her hands, calloused and strong, moved with a practiced efficiency born of necessity. She was a woman of few words, her face weathered by sun and wind, her eyes the color of a winter sky, holding a quiet resilience. She had built this cabin with her own hands, piece by piece, after her family had succumbed to the fever years ago. The silence of the wilderness had become her constant companion, a vast, indifferent canvas for her grief. She hunted, trapped, and tended a small, hardy garden in the brief summer months, a self-sufficient existence that demanded every ounce of her strength and cunning. But this storm, this monstrous white fury, felt different. It was a primal force, threatening to swallow everything, including the fragile flicker of life within her cabin. A sudden, violent gust rattled the door, sending a shiver through the wooden frame. Clara tightened her shawl, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. The blizzard had raged for 3 days and 2 nights, an unending white maelstrom that had driven every living creature to seek shelter. She had enough provisions to last another week, maybe 2, if she rationed carefully. Her only worry was the dwindling supply of firewood, each chop of her axe a battle against the encroaching cold. She rose, her joints aching, and walked to the window, wiping away the condensation with the back of her hand. The world outside was a blur of white, the familiar outlines of the pine trees swallowed by the swirling snow. The silence, when the wind momentarily lulled, was profound, a heavy blanket that pressed down on the land. It was a silence that spoke of isolation, of the unforgiving nature of the frontier. Clara turned away, a sigh escaping her lips. There was nothing to do but wait. Wait for the storm to break, for the world to reveal itself once more. She poured herself a mug of strong black coffee, its warmth a small comfort against the chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. As she sat by the fire, the rhythmic crackle of burning wood was the only sound, a lullaby of survival. She thought of the countless nights she had spent alone in this cabin, the countless storms she had weathered. Each one had left its mark, etching deeper lines into her face, strengthening the resolve in her heart. The frontier didn't ask for permission. It simply demanded endurance. And Clara had learned to endure. But as the hours crawled by, a new sound, faint and almost imperceptible at first, began to pierce the storm's roar. It was a high-pitched wail carried on the wind, a sound that seemed impossible in such desolation. Clara frowned, listening intently. It couldn't be. The storm was too fierce, the wilderness too empty. Yet there it was again, a fragile, desperate cry. Her heart, long accustomed to the stoic silence of solitude, lurched. It was the sound of a child. The cry was unmistakable now, though still faint, a thin thread of sound weaving through the blizzard's fury. Clara stood frozen, her blood turning to ice despite the warmth of the fire. A child, out here, in this storm? It was unthinkable. No one could survive for long in such conditions, least of all a helpless infant. Her mind, practical and hardened, immediately dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, or perhaps an animal caught in a snare. But the sound persisted, a fragile, human lament that tugged at something deep within her, a dormant instinct she thought had long since withered. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the latch of the heavy wooden door. To step outside into that raging white hell was to risk her own life. The wind could disorient her in seconds. The snow could bury her alive. Survival on the frontier demanded caution, a ruthless calculation of risk. Yet the cry, so vulnerable, so utterly alone, was a direct assault on the fortress she had built around her heart. Taking a deep breath, Clara grabbed her thickest wool coat, pulling it tightly around her. She wrapped a scarf around her face, leaving only her eyes exposed, and pulled on her heavy leather gloves. She snatched a lantern from its hook, its dim light a meager defense against the encroaching darkness and the blinding snow. Foolish, she muttered to herself, the word lost in the wind's shriek as she unlatched the door. The moment she stepped out, the blizzard hit her with the force of a physical blow. The wind tore at her clothes, the snow stung her eyes, and the cold instantly numbed her exposed skin. She pulled the door shut behind her, plunging herself into the heart of the white chaos. The cabin, her sanctuary, vanished behind the swirling curtain of snow. She held the lantern high, its feeble glow barely penetrating the gloom. The cry, now louder, seemed to come from the direction of the old pine grove, a cluster of ancient trees that offered some meager shelter from the wind. Each step was a battle, her boots sinking deep into the drifts, the snow reaching her knees. She stumbled, righted herself, and pushed forward, guided only by the desperate sound. "Hello?" She called out, her voice ripped away by the wind. "Is anyone there?" No answer, only the relentless shriek of the storm and the fragile cry of the child. She pressed on, her lungs burning, her muscles aching. The cold was insidious, seeping through her layers of clothing, threatening to paralyze her. She knew the dangers, had seen men lost to blizzards, their frozen bodies found weeks later, mere husks of their former selves. Finally, she reached the edge of the pine grove. The snow here was even deeper, piled high against the gnarled trunks. The cry was clearer now, a pitiful, continuous sob. It was coming from beneath a low-hanging bough, where a small, dark bundle lay half-buried in the snow. Clara dropped to her knees, heedless of the biting cold. Her gloved hands, trembling slightly, reached out and brushed away the snow. What she found made her gasp, a sound swallowed by the wind. It was a cradle board, crudely fashioned from wood and leather, and strapped within it, wrapped in thin, worn blankets, was a baby. A tiny, dark-skinned infant, its face blue with cold, its small fists clenched, its mouth open in a silent, desperate wail. The baby was clearly Comanche, a child of the Plains tribes. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend how a Comanche infant could be abandoned here, in the middle of such a storm. Had the parents been caught in the blizzard? Had they fallen? Or had they, in a desperate act of survival, left the child behind, hoping someone would find it? There was no time for questions. The baby was barely alive. Its skin was icy to the touch, its breathing shallow. Clara carefully unstrapped the cradle board, her fingers clumsy with cold and urgency. She pulled the child close, tucking it inside, her coat against her chest, trying to transfer her own body heat. The baby, sensing the warmth, whimpered, then instinctively burrowed closer. Turning, Clara faced the blinding wall of snow. The cabin was gone, swallowed by the storm. Disorientation set in, a chilling fear that she wouldn't find her way back. But the weight of the tiny life against her chest gave her a new surge of determination. She had to get back. For the child. She stumbled through the snow, her eyes straining, trying to discern any familiar landmark. The wind seemed to mock her, pushing her off course. She felt a growing despair, the cold creeping into her bones, threatening to drag her down. Just as she felt her strength waning, a faint flicker of light, a ghostly yellow glow, appeared through the swirling white. The cabin. Her cabin. With renewed effort, she pushed forward, each step a monumental struggle. Finally, she reached the door, fumbling with the latch with numb fingers. She burst inside, collapsing onto the floor, the baby still clutched tightly to her chest. The warmth of the cabin enveloped them, a blessed reprieve from the unforgiving cold. She had faced the storm, and she had brought a fragile new life back from its clutches. The cabin, usually a sanctuary of quiet solitude, now hummed with a new, urgent energy. Clara lay on the floor for a moment, gasping for breath, the tiny bundle against her chest the only thing that mattered. The baby, no longer exposed to the brutal wind, had stopped crying, its small body shivering violently. With trembling hands, Clara carefully unwrapped the blankets. The infant was even smaller than she had first thought, a fragile being with dark, delicate features. Its skin was mottled blue and white from the cold, its lips chapped. She quickly stripped off the wet, icy blankets, her heart aching at the sight of its vulnerability. She moved with a newfound purpose, her movements swift and precise. She laid the baby on a clean, dry wool blanket near the roaring fireplace, its heat a welcome embrace. She rubbed its tiny limbs gently, trying to restore circulation, murmuring soft, unintelligible words of comfort. She remembered old remedies, things her mother had done for her when she was a child. She heated a small pot of water, then dipped a clean cloth into it, wringing it out before gently wiping the baby's cold skin. The baby whimpered, a tiny, fragile sound, and its eyes, dark and wide, fluttered open, looking up at her with an ancient wisdom. Clara felt a jolt, a connection that transcended language and culture. This was a life, utterly dependent on her, a tiny spark in the vast wilderness that she had no milk, of course. She was not a mother, but she had broth, rich and nourishing, made from dried venison. She carefully strained a small amount, letting it cool, then dipped a clean piece of cloth into it, squeezing a few drops onto the baby's lips. The infant instinctively sucked, its tiny tongue working. Clara repeated the process, patiently, until the baby seemed to revive, its color slowly returning. She wrapped the baby in fresh, warm blankets, tucking it securely into the cradle board she had found, which she now placed close to the fire. The baby, fed and warm, finally drifted into a fitful sleep, its small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Clara sat beside it, watching, her own exhaustion forgotten. The cabin, usually a place of quiet reflection, now felt alive, filled with the soft sounds of the baby's breathing, the crackle of the fire, and the persistent howl of the wind outside. She looked at the tiny face, so innocent, so vulnerable. This was a Comanche child. The tribes were known to be fierce, protective of their own. How had this child come to be abandoned? The question gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. For now, the only thing that mattered was keeping this fragile life alive. Days blurred into a timeless rhythm within the cabin. The blizzard continued its assault, trapping them inside. Clara became a silent guardian, a makeshift mother. She learned the baby's cries, its feeding schedule, the gentle sway that lulled it to sleep. She found a small piece of soft buckskin and fashioned a crude diaper, washing it carefully each time. She hummed old lullabies her mother used to sing, her voice, rusty from disuse, surprisingly soothing. The baby, whom Clara simply called Little One in her thoughts, slowly gained strength. Its skin regained its healthy glow. Its cries became stronger, its eyes brighter. It would gaze at Clara with an unwavering intensity, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Clara, who had lived for so long in the quiet solitude of her grief, found herself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. The cabin, once a refuge from the world, had become a haven of unexpected life. One evening, as the storm finally began to abate, the wind dying down to a mournful sigh, Clara sat by the fire, holding the sleeping baby. Its small hand, no bigger than her thumb, clutched her finger tightly. A profound sense of protectiveness washed over her, fierce and unwavering. This child, abandoned by the storm, had found its way to her. And she, in turn, had found a new purpose, a new reason to brave the harsh realities of the frontier. The cabin, once a place where the cold couldn't reach her, was now a place where the warmth of a new life had ignited a fire in her long dormant heart. The blizzard finally broke on the 5th day, leaving behind a world transformed. The landscape was an endless expanse of pristine white, the snow piled high against the cabin walls, reaching the eaves in places. The sky, a brilliant, piercing blue, stretched endlessly above, a stark contrast to the oppressive gray of the storm. The air was crisp, clean, and utterly still, the silence now a vast echoing emptiness. Clara stepped outside, pulling her coat tighter, her breath misting. In the frigid air, the sun, reflecting off the snow, was blinding. She squinted, taking in the transformed world. The familiar path to the creek was buried, the distant mountains shrouded in a thick white blanket. It was a beautiful, yet daunting sight. She knew she had to venture out soon. The firewood supply was critically low, and she needed to check her traps. But first, she had to ensure the little one was safe. She thought of the Comanche. They would surely be searching for their lost child. The thought brought a knot of anxiety to her stomach. She had heard stories, tales of fierce warriors, of raids and retribution. But she also knew of their deep connection to family, their reverence for children. Would they see her as a kidnapper, or as a rescuer? Inside, the baby stirred, a soft coo escaping its lips. Clara returned, her gaze softening as she looked at the infant. The little one was thriving. Its skin was no longer pale, its eyes bright and curious. It would gurgle and reach out with tiny hands, its movements becoming more deliberate. Clara found herself talking to it more, explaining the sounds of the cabin, the warmth of the fire, the taste of the broth. She was teaching it about her world, a world of solitude and survival. Yet she knew this was not its world. Its world was the vast plains, the nomadic life of the Comanche, the rhythms of their ancient traditions. She was merely a temporary guardian, a bridge between its lost past and its uncertain future. The thought of parting with the child, of returning it to its own people, sent a pang through her heart. In these few days, the little one had filled a void she hadn't even realized existed, a quiet ache for connection that had lingered since her own family was gone. She spent the next few days clearing snow from around the cabin, creating a small path to the woodpile. The work was arduous, her muscles protesting with every swing of the shovel. But the clear sky and the crisp air were a welcome change from the claustrophobic confines of the blizzard. She kept a constant vigil, her eyes scanning the horizon, listening for any sound that might signal the approach of others. One afternoon, as she chopped wood, the rhythmic thud of her axe echoing in the stillness, she paused, her head cocked. A faint sound, carried on the wind, reached her ears. It was not the wind, nor an animal. It was the distinct sound of hooves, many hooves, approaching from the north. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. The Comanche, they were coming. She dropped the axe, her hands suddenly clammy. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She was a lone woman, deep in the wilderness, with a Comanche child in her care. What would they do? Would they understand? Or would they see her as an intruder, a threat? She rushed back to the cabin, her mind racing. She had no weapons beyond her hunting rifle, and she knew that would be useless against a war party. Her only defense was the truth, and the innocent life she held within her walls. She scooped up the little one, holding it close, its warmth a small comfort against the rising tide of panic. She looked out the window, her breath hitched. Through the trees, emerging from the vast white expanse, a line of dark figures appeared. Horsemen, many of them. Their silhouettes, stark against the brilliant snow, grew larger with every passing moment. They moved with a silent, disciplined grace. Their horses' hooves muffled by the deep snow. Clara knew this was it. The moment of truth. She was caught between two worlds, her solitary existence and the powerful, ancient world of the Comanche, and in her arms she held the fragile link that bound them. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling. Hands, she had faced storms, wild animals, and the crushing loneliness of the frontier. Now she faced the unknown, a challenge far greater than any she had encountered before. The line of Comanche warriors approached the cabin, their horses moving with a silent, almost spectral grace through the deep snow. There were at least 100 of them, perhaps more, their faces stern and unreadable beneath their war paint. And feathers. They were a formidable sight, a force of nature in themselves, and Clara felt a primal fear grip her. She stood at the window, the little one clutched tightly to her chest, its small head nestled against her shoulder. The baby sensing her tension, whimpered softly. Clara tried to soothe it, her voice a shaky whisper. "It's all right, little one. It's all right." The warriors stopped a respectful distance from the cabin, their horses snorting plumes of white breath into the frigid air. They dismounted with quiet efficiency, their movements fluid and practiced. One man, taller and broader than the others, with a magnificent eagle feather in his hair and a stoic, commanding presence, stepped forward. He was clearly the leader. Clara knew she had to go out. To remain inside would be seen as an act of defiance, or worse, fear. She took another deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She opened the door, stepping out onto the small porch, the cold air biting at her exposed face. The leader's eyes, dark and piercing, met hers. There was no immediate aggression, only an intense, unwavering gaze that seemed to penetrate her very soul. He looked at her, then his gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or a profound relief, crossed his face, quickly masked. Clara held the baby out slightly, just enough for him to see its face. "I found him," she said, her voice surprisingly steady though. It trembled slightly on the last word, "in the snow." During the storm, the leader's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He took a step closer, his gaze fixed on the infant. He did not speak, but his silence was heavy, filled with an unspoken question. Clara continued, her words tumbling out, desperate to convey the truth. "He was alone, freezing. I brought him in. I kept him warm. I fed him." She gestured vaguely. "Towards the cabin. He is safe." The leader's gaze returned to her, studying her face, searching for any hint of deception. Clara met his gaze directly, her own eyes unwavering. She had nothing to hide. She was simply a woman who had found a lost child and sought to protect it. He then spoke, his voice deep and resonant, the words in a language Clara did not understand. Yet the tone conveyed a sense of gravity and authority. He gestured to one of the warriors who then dismounted and approached. This warrior, younger than the leader, had a gentler face. He spoke in broken English, his words slow and deliberate. "He asks if you are well, if the child is well." Clara nodded. "We are both well. The child is strong now. He was very cold, but he is warm now." The younger warrior translated her words to the leader. The leader listened, his expression unchanging. Then he spoke again, a longer stream of words, and the younger warrior translated. He says, "This is his son. His wife, she was lost in the blizzard. They were traveling. She fell. She left the child for someone to find." The younger warrior's voice was tinged with sorrow. Clara felt a wave of profound sadness wash over her. The tragedy of it. A mother, lost in the storm, her last act to save her child. She looked at the leader, her heart aching for his loss. Leader then extended his hand, a gesture that Clara recognized as a request for the child. Her arms tightened instinctively around the little one, the thought of handing him over, of letting go of this tiny life that had brought so much unexpected light into her world, was a sharp pain. But she knew it was the right thing to do. This was his family, his people. With a heavy heart, Clara slowly extended the baby, cradling it carefully in her arms. The leader approached, his movements deliberate. He took his son, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he cradled the infant. He held the child close, his eyes closing for a moment, a raw, unmasked emotion fleetingly crossing his face, grief, relief, and profound love. The other warriors, who had remained silent and still, now stirred. A murmur went through their ranks, a collective sigh of relief. Some of them dismounted, approaching the leader, their faces showing a mix of sorrow and gratitude. The leader, holding his son, looked at Clara again. This time, his gaze was different. It was no longer just intense and searching, but held a deep respect, an unspoken acknowledgement of her courage and compassion. He spoke a few words to the younger warrior, who translated. He says, "You have saved his son. You have honored his wife's last wish. He offers you his thanks, and his people's thanks." Clara simply nodded, tears stinging her eyes. She had done what any human would do, what her own heart had compelled her to do. The silence that followed was not empty, but filled with the weight of unspoken gratitude, of a bridge built between two disparate worlds by the fragile life of a child and the quiet courage of a lone woman. The footprints in the snow, leading to her cabin, were no longer just a trail of desperation, but a path of unexpected connection. The Comanche warriors remained at a respectful distance, their horses tethered, their eyes watchful. The leader, who Clara now understood was the child's father, stood holding his son, his gaze still fixed on the infant's face. The younger warrior, who spoke broken English, served as their interpreter. "My name is Bear Shield," the leader finally said, his voice deep, translated by the younger warrior. "And this is my son, Little Eagle." Clara nodded. "I am Clara." Bear Shield looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You saved him. You brought him back from the storm." "He was alone," Clara replied simply. "No one should be alone in such a storm." Bear Shield's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. He then spoke to his warriors, a few sharp guttural commands. Immediately, several warriors dismounted and began to approach the cabin, not with aggression, but with purpose. Clara tensed, but Bear Shield raised a hand, a silent reassurance. "They will clear snow. Bring wood," the interpreter explained. "For you. For your kindness." Clara watched, surprised, as the warriors, with their powerful builds and practiced movements, began to shovel the heavy snow from around her cabin. Others went to her woodpile, quickly and efficiently chopping and stacking more logs than she could have managed in a week. Their movements were swift, their silence profound, broken only by the rhythmic thud of shovels and axes. It was an unexpected gesture, a silent offering of gratitude. Clara had prepared for confrontation, for suspicion, perhaps even for violence. Instead, she received help, a recognition of her act of compassion. Bear Shield, still holding Little Eagle, approached the porch. He looked at the cabin, then back at Clara. "You live here?" "Alone?" Clara nodded. "Yes, for many years." "It is a hard life," he observed, his eyes sweeping over the vast silent plains. "It is," she agreed, "but it is my life." He nodded slowly, a profound understanding in his gaze. He knew about hard lives, about solitude, about survival in this unforgiving land. As the sun began to dip towards the western horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the snow, the warriors finished their work. The cabin was now clear of snow, a massive pile of firewood stacked neatly against its side. They gathered silently, awaiting Bear Shield's next command. Bear Shield then spoke to Clara, his words translated by the younger warrior. "We must go. The camp, they are waiting. But we will not forget what you have done." Clara felt a pang of sadness. She knew this moment would come, the parting, but it was still difficult. She had grown accustomed to the small, warm presence of Little Eagle, to the quiet hum of life he had brought into her solitary world. Bear Shield then did something unexpected. He walked closer to Clara, and with his free hand, he reached out and gently touched her shoulder. It was a brief, light touch, but it carried a weight of sincerity, a silent blessing. "You have a good heart, woman of the cabin," he said. His voice softer now, almost a whisper, as the interpreter translated. "You are brave. You are kind." Then he turned, and with a final nod, he mounted his horse, Little Eagle cradled safely in his arm. The other warriors followed suit, mounting their horses with practiced ease. They formed a silent procession, turning their horses north, towards the distant plains where their camp lay. Clara watched them go, a lump in her throat. The sight of the Comanche warriors disappearing into the vastness of the snow-covered landscape was both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. They were a powerful ancient people, and she, a lone woman, had touched their world in a profound way. As the last warrior vanished over the horizon, the silence returned to the plains, a vast, echoing emptiness. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the silence of isolation, but a silence filled with the echoes of a child's cry, the thud of shovels, and the unspoken gratitude of a proud people. Clara returned to her cabin, the warmth of the fire a comfort, but the absence of the little one a sharp ache in her heart. The arrival of the Comanche had been a moment of fear, but it had transformed into a profound experience of human connection, a testament to the unexpected bonds that could form even in the harshest of lands. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the Comanche arrival lingered in Clara's mind like a vivid dream. The cabin felt emptier now, the silence heavier without the gurgling and cooing of Little Eagle. Yet, a new sense of peace had settled within her. She had faced her fears, acted on compassion, and in doing so, had connected with a world she had only ever observed from a distance. She continued her daily routines, chopping wood, checking traps, tending to her small cabin. But her gaze often drifted to the north, to the vast expanse where the Comanche had disappeared. She wondered about Little Eagle, if he was thriving, if his father, Bear Shield, had found solace in his return. One crisp morning, as the first signs of spring began to emerge, tiny green shoots pushing through the melting snow, the faint chirping of returning birds, Clara was startled by a sound. Not the heavy thud of horses, but a softer, more deliberate approach. She looked up from her work, her hand instinctively going to the rifle above the fireplace. Standing at the edge of the clearing, not 100 yards from her cabin, were two figures. One was the younger Comanche warrior who had spoken English, the interpreter. The other was an older woman, her face deeply lined, her eyes wise and gentle. She carried a large, intricately woven basket. Clara lowered her hand, a sense of cautious curiosity replacing her initial alarm. She stepped out onto the porch, waiting. The younger warrior raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "Clara," he said, his voice soft, "we have come." Clara nodded, her eyes on the older woman. "Welcome." They approached slowly, deliberately. The older woman's gaze was kind, her presence emanating a quiet strength. The younger warrior spoke. "This is Grandmother Moon. She's the firekeeper of our people. She has come with a gift." Grandmother Moon stepped forward, her eyes meeting Clara's. She spoke in her own language, a melodic stream of words, and the younger warrior translated. She says, "The spirit of the storm brought the child to you. You are blessed for your kindness. You are a firekeeper too. You kept the flame of life burning for Little Eagle." Clara felt a lump in her throat. She had never thought of herself in such terms. She was just a woman, alone, doing what needed to be done. Grandmother Moon then presented the basket to Clara. Clara carefully took it. It was heavy, filled with dried berries, cured meat, beautifully tanned hides, and a small, intricately carved wooden doll. It was a bounty, a gift of immense value in the harsh frontier. "These are gifts from our people," the interpreter explained, "for your generosity, for your courage." Clara looked at the gifts, then at Grandmother Moon, her eyes welling up. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is too much." Grandmother Moon smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up her ancient face. She spoke again, and the interpreter translated. She says, "It is not too much. It is what is right. We do not forget. We honor those who honor life." Then, Grandmother Moon did something that surprised Clara even more. She reached out and gently took Clara's hands in her own. Her touch was warm, comforting. She spoke again, her words flowing like a gentle river. She says, "You are not alone. The spirit of the land, it knows your heart. And our people, they know your heart." Clara felt a profound connection, a warmth spreading through her, deeper than any fire. It was the warmth of acceptance, of belonging. She had always been an outsider, even in her own family. But here, in the heart of the wilderness, with a people she barely knew, she felt a kinship, a recognition of her spirit. Grandmother Moon then looked at Clara with a deep, knowing gaze. She spoke a few more words, and the interpreter's voice was filled with reverence as he translated. She says, "Your name, Clara, is good. But for your heart, for what you have done, our people give you a new name. From this day, you will be known as Snow Rose." Clara gasped, tears streaming down her face. Snow Rose, a name that spoke of beauty, resilience, and the unexpected blossoming of life in the harshest of conditions. It was a name that acknowledged her journey, her strength, and the compassion that had bloomed in her solitary world. Grandmother Moon squeezed her hands, then released them. She and the younger warrior turned, and with a final nod, they began their silent journey back into the vast expanse of the plains. Clara watched them go, the basket of gifts heavy in her arms, the name Snow Rose echoing in her mind. The gift was not just the provisions, but the profound recognition, the acceptance, and the quiet promise of a connection that transcended the boundaries of language and culture. She was no longer just Clara, the lone woman of the cabin. She was Snow Rose, the firekeeper, a bridge between two worlds, her heart forever touched by the spirit of the Comanche. The name Snow Rose settled upon Clara like a soft, warm blanket, wrapping her in a sense of belonging she had never known. The gifts from the Comanche, especially the intricately carved wooden doll, were cherished treasures. She placed the doll on her mantelpiece, a constant reminder of the fragile life she had saved and the unexpected connection it had forged. The seasons turned. Spring blossomed into a vibrant summer, the plains alive with wildflowers and the hum of insects. Clara continued her solitary life, but it was no longer truly solitary. The visits from the Comanche, though infrequent, became a quiet rhythm. Sometimes it was the young interpreter, bringing news of the tribe, or simply sharing stories. Other times, it was a small group of warriors, stopping by for water or to trade furs for her dried herbs. And then, one day, Bear Shield came again. He came alone, on horseback, his face still stoic, but his eyes held a new depth. He carried Little Eagle, who was now a robust toddler, his dark eyes bright with curiosity. Clara's heart swelled at the sight of him. Little Eagle, no longer. The fragile infant now squirmed in his father's arms, his gaze fixed on Clara. Bear Shield dismounted, and the first thing he did was gently place Little Eagle on the ground. The child, after a moment of hesitation, toddled unsteadily towards Clara, his arms outstretched. "Mama," Little Eagle gurgled, a soft, indistinct sound, but the intention was clear. Clara knelt, tears blurring her vision, and embraced the child, his small arms wrapped around her neck, his tiny body warm and solid against hers. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a culmination of all the quiet kindnesses and unspoken bonds. Bear Shield watched them, a rare, gentle smile gracing his lips. He spoke, his voice deep, and this time he did not wait for the interpreter. He spoke in his own tongue, slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on Clara. "Honey," he said, pointing to Clara. Wah." He then pointed to Little Eagle, then to himself, and then made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the land. Clara looked at him, her heart pounding. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. He was speaking of family, of connection, of the land that bound them. Bear Shield then took a deep breath. He spoke again, his gaze unwavering. "Snow Rose," he said, using her new name, his voice filled with reverence. "You are Atiwa to my son. You are Mother." The word hung in the air, a sacred offering. Mother, not by blood, but by spirit, by sacrifice, by love. Clara, who had thought her days of motherhood were lost with her own family, was now being given a new name, a new role, by a people she had once feared. Bear Shield then explained, through gestures and a few broken English words, that Little Eagle had often called out for her, especially during the long nights. He had described her, the woman of the warm hands, the woman who made the fire. And the elders, after much deliberation, had agreed. Clara, Snow Rose, had earned a place in their hearts, a bridge between their world and hers. From that day forward, Clara's cabin became more than just a solitary dwelling. It became a quiet outpost of peace, a meeting point between two worlds. The Comanche would visit, bringing news, sharing knowledge of the land, and sometimes bringing Little Eagle to spend time with his Itaha. Clara, in turn, shared her knowledge of farming, her simple remedies, and the warmth of her hearth. She learned more of their language, of their traditions, of their deep respect for the land and for life. She saw their strength, their resilience, and their profound capacity for love and forgiveness. She was no longer just a lone woman on the frontier. She was Snow Rose, the firekeeper, the Itawa of Little Eagle, and an unexpected bridge to peace. Her story was not one of grand battles or epic journeys, but of quiet courage, of compassion blooming in the harshest of conditions. It was a testament to the truth that love doesn't arrive loud, with fanfare and declaration. It arrives slow and true, in the desperate cry of a child, in the silent acts of kindness, in the acceptance of a new name, and in the profound realization that home isn't just a place on a map, but a choice of the heart, a connection forged in the crucible of the wild, where even the storm doesn't ask, but the heart always answers.